Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council's Icebreaker Winter Speaker Series. Today's topic is the Line 5 Straits Tunnel. Will it become a reality? My name is Jennifer McKay, and I'm the Policy Director at Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council. I will be the host for today's event. First, a bit of housekeeping before we begin. All attendees will be muted throughout the webinar to avoid background noises. Throughout the presentation, you can ask a question by typing your question into the Q&A box in the webinar controls. After the presentation, there'll be time for Q&A. And at that time, I'll go through the questions that you have submitted, and I'll do my best to answer all of the questions. Depending on time, I may not be able to. And in addition, I do want to mention that today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Watershed Council's YouTube channel at a later date. So for those of you that are not familiar with the Watershed Council, we're a nonprofit membership-based organization with more than 40 years of history protecting and improving water resources of Northern Michigan. We protect, restore, and enhance our lakes, streams, wetlands, and groundwater through respected advocacy, innovative education, technically sound water quality monitoring, thorough research, and restoration. We achieve our mission by empowering others, and we believe in the capacity to make a positive difference. We work locally, regionally, and throughout the Great Lakes Basin to achieve our goals. Currently, we have 12 staff members and hundreds of volunteers that work tirelessly to achieve our mission. Today, I'll be covering the status of the various permit applications that Enbridge Energy must obtain to replace and relocate the segment of Line 5 crossing in a tunnel beneath the Straits of Mackinac. I'll also set the stage for you, providing you with a bit of history and recent events surrounding Line 5. And then we'll discuss what the future may hold. So the issue of Line 5 began way back in July 2010. That was when Enbridge's pipeline in southern Michigan ruptured, releasing heavy crude and oil into the Talmadge Creek and Kalamazoo River. More than approximately 1.15 million gallons of oil was recovered from the river, according to the EPA. The cleanup and restoration of the some 40 miles of the river took about 5 years to complete and cost Enbridge approximately $1.21 billion. This failure represented one of the largest inland oil spills affecting waterways in U.S. history and is one of the most expensive cleanups to date. In light of this spill, it was not surprising that the public and governmental attention turned to the older pipelines that run throughout Michigan, including Line 5 under the Straits of Mackinac, and began looking at the devastating ecological and economic damage that would occur if any of these pipelines failed. To look at Line 5 in the larger context of the pipeline infrastructure, Enbridge operates the world's longest crude oil and liquid transportation system across the US and Canada. Line 5 is part of what is called the main line system. With nearly 8,600 miles of active pipe, Enbridge's mainline pipeline network has the capacity to transport 2.85 million barrels a day of light and heavy crude oil. The mainline originates in Edmonton, Alberta, and extends east across the prairies. The pipeline crosses the US-Canadian border in Manitoba, where it joins with the Enbridge Lakehead system, which is aptly named because it goes right around and through our Great Lakes. At Clearbrook, Minnesota, the main line receives US crude oil from the Enbridge North Dakota pipeline and connects with the Minnesota pipeline that can deliver crude oil to refineries in Minnesota and Illinois. At Superior, Wisconsin, the main line branches into two segments. The northern pipeline passes through northern Wisconsin and Michigan before crossing into Ontario at Sarnia. And the southern leg contours south of Lake Michigan to Lockport in Chicago and Illinois before turning northeast and passing through Indiana and southern Michigan, where it also re-enters Canada at Sarnia, Ontario. In total, Enbridge has 4 wholly owned crude oil pipelines in Michigan, totaling approximately 930 miles of pipe. We have line 5, of course, which we're talking about today, line 78, which is the old line 6B that traverses across southern Michigan, and lines 17 and line 79, which are shorter pipelines that go to Detroit and Toledo. So line 5 is a 645-mile petroleum pipeline owned and operated by Enbridge Energy Limited Partnership. 547 miles of that pipeline are in Michigan. Again, it runs from Superior, Wisconsin, across the UP, through northern Michigan, down to the Thumb region, and over to Sarnia, Ontario. Through this path, the pipeline crosses 19 of Michigan's 83 counties, which represent approximately 9% of the state population. Line 5 is 30 inches in diameter, except when crossing the Straits of Mackinac, where it divides into two 20-inch diameter pipelines. The line became operational in 1953 and carries up to 540,000 barrels, or 22.7 million gallons, of light crude, synthetic crude, and natural gas liquids per day. At the Straits of Mackinac, line 5 is divided into two parallel pipelines, each of which is 20 inches in diameter and extends more than 4 miles across the lake bottom. The pipelines in the Straits are buried 15 feet deep until about a depth of 65 feet of water. Deeper than 65 feet, the pipes were laid on the lake bottom. The 20-inch diameter pipes in the Straits have a wall thickness of approximately 0.812 inches, which is much thicker than the rest of the pipeline infrastructure. The maximum operating pressure for the Straits pipeline is 600 pounds per square inch, or PSI, and the pipelines are generally operated around 200 PSI, with a daily range of 0 to 300 PSI. The portions of the pipeline in the Straits have automatic shutoff valves, where the valves will shut off automatically in the event that the pressure drops. These automatic shutoff valves take approximately 3 minutes to close. There's also an electric backup generation at the Straits to make sure valves can operate in the event of a power outage. According to Enbridge, if the automatic shutoff valves close correctly, the approximate volume of oil released from a single pipeline between those valves would be 4,950 barrels, which equates to 207,900 gallons. An independent risk analysis commissioned by the state of Michigan found that a worst case scenario release of 58,000 barrels, or 2.4 million gallons of oil from a double rupture of the Straits pipeline would result in nearly $1.9 billion in costs for cleanup, property loss, lost income from tourism, recreation, and other damages. Line 5 is most notably known for crossing the Straits of Mackinac, but it also crosses under multiple rivers and streams, goes through miles of wetlands, and crosses under many of our sparkling inland lakes. It crosses approximately 400 water bodies across the state of Michigan. In northern Michigan, Line 5 crosses the Indian River, the Little Sturgeon River, Pigeon River, and Upper Black River, and traverses within a few miles or less from Twin Lake, Paradise Lake, Mud Lake, Monroe Lake, Mullet Lake, Douglas Lake, and Burt Lake. These inland portions can pose just as great, if not greater, threat to our waters due to basic construction, operation, and maintenance of the line. So the wall thickness, as I mentioned in the Straits, was thicker than the rest of the line. So in inland pipeline, it's only 0.281 inches thick, again, compared to the 0.813 inches at the Straits. Along with the thinner pipe, it operates at a higher pressure. In addition, it has a side seam, which the Straits portion of pipe does not have. The seam can be subject to stress cracking and could cause an inland pipe to be more vulnerable. The inland portion is also not subject to the same inspection frequencies as the Straits. The U.S. Coast Guard personnel and local emergency managers Both pointed to the stretch of Line 5 along US Highway 2 near Lake Michigan's northern shore as their greatest concern. They cited as primary concerns less robust technology, such as the pipeline wall thickness and monitoring equipment, higher vulnerability to an errant strike, potential access problems for containment and cleanup equipment, and difficult terrain and environment for cleanup activities. On April 1st, 2018, we were lucky. We managed to somehow not have a complete catastrophe when a 6-ton anchor from barge and tugboat was dragged through the Straits of Mackinac. And the crew had no clue it was being dragged on the lake bed until nearly 2 days later when it came to port. The anchor dented Enbridge Energy's dual Line 5 oil pipelines and sliced American Transmission Company's 2 underwater power cables, causing $100 million in damage to the cables and releasing 600 gallons of dielectric fluid, which is basically mineral oil, into the straits. Thankfully, there was minimal risk to the fisheries and wildlife. On Line 5, there were 2 dents in the west line and 1 in the east line. And also the coating was damaged in 4 areas, with it down to bare metal in at least 2 spots. As a result of this, the Michigan Department of Natural Resources immediately issued a no anchor rule. That was followed up with the US Coast Guard approving in 2018 a restricted navigation area, which effectively designated it as a no anchor zone. So no vessel may now anchor or loiter within the restricted navigation area at any time unless they get permission from the captain of port in Sault Ste. Marie. However, in an emergency, vessels are allowed to deviate from this regulation if it's deemed necessary to avoid endangering people, the environment, or property. So here's a video that shows you some of the damage, and for the sake of time, I'm gonna speed it up a little bit. So you can see, obviously, this is the east line. You can see the biota missing from the pipeline where the anchor hit. You can see an area where the coating has been taken off. Obviously, we were extremely lucky that nothing more significant happened. Got big difference between the biota on the left and right versus where it's showing where the anchor struck. And so now that moves over to the west line. And this footage was obtained by Enbridge, by one of their contractors after the incident. And so you can see in this footage, obviously, the damage to the bottom land of the lake by the anchor being dragged. Clearly, that's where the anchor hit. And then once again, showing where not only the biota, the mussels are missing, but as it gets close, you can see the coating is missing and it's down to bare steel. So Enbridge responded to this incident by instituting a number of measures to try and enhance safety in the straits, basically trying to avoid future anchor strikes. And so they put in a number of measures, including patrol vessels that will monitor ships in the straits to determine if their anchors are up. So this image that you're looking at came from Enbridge. You can see how they're monitoring the ships and looking at the anchor systems to see if they are intact or not. They have a vessel monitoring and alert system through a company called Vesper Marines. The system is called Guardian Protect, and it basically allows Enbridge to monitor and alert ships that are coming into the straits, that they send an alert notifying them that they're within the no anchor zone. And so hopefully the vessels will make sure the anchors are up and not drop an anchor unless it's absolutely life-threatening and they need to. And in addition, Enbridge has put cameras at the straits on Enbridge facilities, which are onshore, to monitor the ship traffic basically 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is extremely important for when the times when these Enbridge support vessels are unable to actually be out on the water. There were a number of task force and boards, including the Pipeline Safety Advisory Board, which I sat on for 3 years, that worked to identify measures to minimize the risk and improve emergency management for pipelines, not only just Line 5, but pipelines throughout the state of Michigan. During that process, the state under Governor Snyder began signing agreements with Enbridge. And in the end, 3 agreements were signed covering a variety of issues. So the agreements covered when the pipeline had to be temporarily shut down, replacement of the pipeline in the St. Clair River, inclusion of radar systems to actually monitor wave heights in real time, also required Enbridge to carry $1.8 billion in financial assurances in the event of a spill. But most importantly, the state and Enbridge announced in the second agreement that the 2 entities would discuss a further agreement around the design, construction, operation, management, and maintenance of a tunnel under the straits for the replacement of the dual pipelines. And this was really the official began to the Great Lakes Tunnel project. It was further solidified in December of 2018 when the Mackinac Straits Corridor Authority approved an agreement with Enbridge to build the tunnel beneath the Straits of Mackinac. That agreement was approved by the Mackinac Straits Corridor Authority during their very first meeting, which was just 1 week after former Governor Rick Snyder signed a lame duck bill that created the 3-person panel. The tunnel agreement contains milestones for construction progress, as well as financial penalties for if Enbridge misses deadlines that are within no control of Enbridge. So it would not include delay of permits or lawsuits. Once the tunnel is complete, the ownership will be turned over to the Mackinac Straits Corridor Authority, which will be able to lease space within the tunnel to Enbridge or other utilities if deemed feasible. Enbridge will get a 99-year lease as part of this agreement. One of the primary arguments made by Enbridge and others is the need for the pipeline to maintain the propane supply for the UP. So to address this concern, Governor Whitmer created the UP Energy Task Force by executive order. And the charge of the task force is to assess the UP's overall energy needs and how they're currently being met, as well as identifying and evaluating potential changes that could occur to the energy supply and distribution, and look at the economic and environmental and other impacts of those changes, as well as alternatives to meet the UP's energy needs. So the task force released part 1 of a 2-part report, which focused on the short-term steps that the state could take in reaction to a disruption of propane supply to Michigan customers. The second part of the report will actually evaluate the UP's energy needs through a much broader lens to ensure that the UP's energy needs long-term are met in a manner that's reliable, affordable, as well as environmentally sound. So that first report included specific recommendations to enhance the reliability of propane supply in the UP and a detailed analysis of alternative means of supplying propane if the current supply, which does rely in part on Line 5, changes. And there were some key findings in that technical report that showed that shutting down Line 5 need not cause propane shortages or large price spikes, which is often claimed. So it had the identification of a number of robust and diverse alternatives to deliver propane by rail and other supply hubs. And it also came to the conclusion that supply distributions will likely result in only modest wholesale price increases. The second and final report from the UP Energy Task Force is actually due to the governor by March 31st of this year. Geotechnical borings was one of the next big things that Enbridge conducted for the tunnel project. Enbridge completed a $40 million geotechnical investigation in the Straits. It was completed by November of 2019. So the geotechnical boring work was to get sediment and rock samples from the lake bed to determine not only the feasibility of the tunnel, but to guide the design of the tunnel and the tunnel boring machine. So samples were taken in 27 locations. 7 were on shore, 6 were near shore, and 14 were in deep water. There was recently a report by an independent contractor, Jacobs, who was hired to analyze the geotechnical investigation and assess the level of risk of tunneling based upon the investigation. And it concluded that the geotechnical investigation was insufficient, that it does not adequately characterize the anticipated ground conditions on the site. Basically, a significant span of the tunnel alignment does not have any borings that reached the proposed tunnel depth, which could lead to significant challenges when tunneling. In June of last year, there was another sort of incident when Enbridge was out working on Line 5 in the Straits. They discovered a screw anchor support had shifted from its original position. So this support was installed in 2018. It was on the east leg, and it lied about 150 feet away from spots on the pipeline where the protective coating had worn away and bare metal was exposed. So Enbridge was ordered to shut down both the east and west leg of the pipeline by a judge. They were allowed to restart the west leg to perform an inline inspection. So basically to run what they call a pig through the line to make sure there was no integrity issues. And they were allowed to continue operating that line based upon the results of that inspection. The east line, where this damage was done, had to remain closed until the federal agency, the Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration, completed an investigation of the line. And so basically, after being shut down on June 19th, due to the damage found, Enbridge was allowed to restart the east leg of Line 5 on September 9th. After the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration noted that it had not identified any integrity issues. In the end, it was vessels contracted by Enbridge to conduct work within the area that are believed to actually be the cause of damage. It was believed that a boat anchor caused the damage to the east segment, and damage on the west segment of Line 5 could have resulted from a wire cable being dragged by a boat. It's also worthwhile to note that during the more than 3-month shutdown, There was no gas shortage and no impact on gas prices. So according to an Enbridge fact sheet, a temporary shutdown would have severe consequences for Michigan's economy and result in about 45% less crude flowing to refineries in our region. And of importance, this actually did not come to fruition during the temporary and partial shutdown. After the multiple incidences that have occurred, the Governor Whitmer, directed the Michigan Department of Natural Resources to begin a comprehensive review of Enbridge's compliance with the 1953 easement. The easement created the terms and conditions under which Enbridge could operate the dual pipelines on the bottomlands of the Great Lakes. So according to the state, so one of the provisions, is the due care provision, in which Enbridge is expected to, at all times, exercise the due care of a reasonably prudent person for the safety and welfare of all persons and of all public and private property. So according to the state, Enbridge has failed for decades to meet its compliance and due care obligations under the easement, and it remains in violation for those obligations. There's nothing Enbridge can do to change its past behavior and disregard for its duties under the easement, and its breaches of the easement's terms and conditions cannot be corrected or otherwise cured. So the state has said Enbridge has not and is not exercising due care in operating the pipeline. The easement requires that each pipeline be physically supported, which means it either rests on the lake bed or be supported by some other structure or device, such as these screw anchors, at least every 75 feet. That's to protect the structural integrity of the pipeline from stresses and vibrations that might be caused by the strong currents surrounding the pipeline. And what the state has said is that for virtually the entire life of the easement, Enbridge has ignored the 75-foot span requirement. And the documents provided by Enbridge confirm that since at least 1963 and continuing through 2012, Enbridge has known that multiple unsupported spans exceeded the 75-feet limit, but failed to take remedial action to address the non-compliance. The longest span was noted at 286 feet. And between 2005 and 2016, there were nearly 250 instances where spans exceeded 75 feet. It's also noted that Enbridge failed to take timely corrective action. So there were delays of up to 3 to 5 years to repair 17 non-compliant spans, 7 years to repair 11 spans, and another 9 years to repair 17 spans. And just to make sure everyone has an understanding of what we're talking about, go if this works. So this is just a visualization showing the anchors that were added between 2013 and 2018. And so it starts with 18 anchors, and through the course of those years, it gets to 147. So again, you can just see how the anchors have been added over the years. Coating concerns. The easement requires Enbridge to maintain a multi-layer coating on the pipelines. And this protective coating is intended to prevent the steel from being exposed to the environmental factors that would cause corrosion or other physical damage. So since at least 2003 and continuing until 2014, Enbridge was on notice that the heavy biota accumulation, the invasive mussels that you saw earlier in the video, on the Straits pipeline made it impossible to do a detailed analysis of the integrity of the coating. And also then in reading a report that Enbridge submitted to the EPA, I came across the word holiday. And when most of us think of the word holiday as a good thing, in this industry, it means an area where pipeline anti-corrosion coating is missing. And so Enbridge's initial response when this was found was there is no evidence that any of the areas identified as holidays areas or areas with a potential delaminated coating have bare metal exposed. And after initially telling the state that there was no bare steel, Enbridge revealed that after additional investigation, there was in fact coating gaps, more than originally announced, and some as large as 16 inches. That included bare steel, as well as this white calcareous deposit that was found along many segments of the pipeline. And in fact, Enbridge knew of these issues for 3 years prior and did not tell the state, nor did they attempt to address them. The easement includes a condition that the minimum curvature of any section of the pipe shall be no less than 2,050 feet radius. So the pipe on the bottom of the straits is not straight because the bottom of the straits is not straight. So this condition relating to the pipeline curvature limits stresses placed upon the pipeline. And inspection reports identified 20 to 25 exceedances of the easement's minimum pipe curvature requirements. According to the state, Enbridge ignored the curvature mandate of the easement, perhaps from the very beginning with installation, and non-compliance with the curvature condition continues today and remains uncorrected. So after the 15-month review, the governor and DNR director notified Enbridge that the 1953 easement allowing it to operate in the straits is being revoked and terminated. They also filed a lawsuit asking the Ingham County Court to recognize the validity of that action. And so the state is revoking the easement for violation of the public trust doctrine, given the unreasonable risk that continued operation of the dual pipelines poses to the Great Lakes, which the state holds in trust for the citizens of Michigan. Transporting millions of gallons of petroleum products every day through 67-year-old pipelines that lie exposed on the entire span of a busy shipping channel presents an extraordinary and unacceptable risk. And so the dual pipelines are vulnerable to anchor strikes, similar dangerous impacts, and the inherent risk that comes with pipeline operations. The state's also terminating the easement based upon Enbridge's persistent and incurable violations of the easement's terms and conditions. So the notice was sent, and it requires Enbridge to cease operations by May 12th of this year, which then will allow for an orderly transition that protects Michigan's energy needs over the coming months. Enbridge replied to the state of Michigan, stating they will not shut down the pipeline in May. And in fact, Enbridge then sued the Governor Whitmer and the DNR in federal court to challenge the state's decision to revoke and terminate the easement. So this lawsuit seeks a federal ruling that federal commerce and pipeline safety laws preempt the state's attempts. So the suit invokes the supremacy clause of the US Constitution, which is, the company argued, places federal pipeline safety law above state law. The Commerce Clause, which stops states from taking protectionist actions affecting interstate commerce, and the Foreign Commerce Clause and Foreign Affairs Doctrine, which prohibits state policies from interfering in foreign affairs. All the while, Enbridge has been in the process of seeking approval to construct and operate the pipeline within the tunnel below the bottomlands of the Straits and Mackinac. So Enbridge is proposing a approximately 3.58 mile tunnel between Point LaBarbe in the UP and McGulpin Point in Michigan's Lower Peninsula. The tunnel has been projected to cost $500 million, although there is question about the cost because that estimate was made early in the planning when the tunnel was proposed to be 10 to 12 feet in diameter. And now the proposal is to build an 18 to 21 foot diameter tunnel constructed using a tunnel boring machine. It's often promoted that the tunnel will be constructed at no expense to Michigan residents, and this is not true. $4.5 million has already been appropriated in 2018 for the planning, oversight, and legal services related to the proposed Mackinac Straits Tunnel project. So in reality, all of us as Michigan citizens are in fact paying for the Line 5 tunnel. Construction is proposed to start on the south side, so Mackinac City. And once it begins, construction activities are expected to occur for 24 hours a day, 6 days a week for an estimated 2 years. On the north side, construction activities are expected to average 12 hours per day, with some activities requiring 24-hour days per operation. That primarily would be breaking up the rock, which may be completed through drilling or blasting with some explosives. The tunnel will be constructed through rock and in deep channel in the Straits through glacial deposits. The top of the tunnel will be approximately 60 feet beneath the lake bed, and at the deepest, up to 250 feet beneath the lake bed. It will be constructed using a tunnel boring machine, and precast concrete lining will be installed as the tunnel is constructed. And then the annual space outside the tunnel's concrete lining will be filled with low permeability grout. So that concrete liner will be a foot thick. In the process of tunneling, approximately 364,000 cubic yards of material will be removed from underneath the lake bed. And this tunnel boring machine is anticipated to average about 40 feet per day. And that's how it's determined that it will take approximately 2 years to bore and construct the tunnel. And that's presuming there are no issues. And actually, Enbridge has put together a really nice video that explains the process. So I'm going to show that. And for the sake of time, I'm going to do the same thing I did previously. And
our homes. It cooks our food.
Cut off part of it.
And helped establish the design of the tunnel. Staging areas will be created from both the north and south shores of the Straits. On the south side, a large portal will be created as the entry point for a tunnel boring machine. The portal will be sheltered to reduce noise and protect workers from the elements. A slurry separation plant will also be established on the south shore. The slurry's extra rungs come out of clay water that will be pumped out of the tunnel when excavation begins. Once the components are separated in the plant, water is reused for the tunnel process. On the north side, a vertical shaft will be built to retrieve and dismantle the tunnel boring machine once it is across the Straits. The tunnel boring machine is 500 feet long.
Okay, give me a second. Apparently the video is not showing. So. Hopefully that corrected the issue. Okay, sorry about the little snafu on hearing. So that walks you through the process. And as it said, upon completion, a new 30-inch line within the tunnel will be tied to the current upland portions of line 5. The pipeline installation is expected to take an additional 8 months. And then, as it mentioned, the existing line 5 would be decommissioned. Enbridge has proposed 2 decommissioning alternatives for the existing pipeline. One would be that the pipeline would be purged, clean, and abandoned in place. So it would remain on the bottom of the Straits of Mackinac. The second one is the pipeline would be, again, purged, cleaned, and then this time the exposed portions of the pipeline would be removed. The portions buried in sediment at below the 65 feet depth would remain in the waterway. So the tunnel has been marketed actually as a multi-use tunnel in which other utilities such as cable, fiber optics can lease space in the tunnel. According to Enbridge, they've actually been approached recently by a third-party utility with interest. So Peninsula Fiber Network from Marquette, Michigan, is currently working with Enbridge engineers to discuss feasibility. Peninsula Fiber Network works with the 911 public service system. For the Line 5 tunnel project actually began construction, Enbridge needs a multitude of approvals from state, federal, and local governments. In April, Enbridge submitted permit applications to multiple permit applications. And one was to the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy for a permit under the authority of Part 303, which is Wetlands Protection, and Part 325, which is Great Lakes Submerged Land Act. So for those impacts to the bottomlands of the Great Lakes. These permits were actually just approved on January 29th. However, Eagle punted many of the large decisions, such as threatened endangered species and archaeological and cultural resources, to the federal government, in particular, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So the Army Corps of Engineers is still currently reviewing the proposed application. They look at it under what is called Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act, which basically regulates work or structures in, over, or under navigable waters of the US. They also look at it under Section 404, the Clean Water Act, which regulates discharges of dredged or filled material into waters of the US, including wetlands. Their decision whether to issue the permit or not will be based on the evaluation of the probable impacts of the proposed activity on the public interest. So it will reflect national concerns for both the protection and utilization of important resources. Essentially, they're looking at, does the benefits expected to accrue from the proposal, are they balanced with the foreseeable detriments? And they'll consider a number of factors such as conservation, economics, wetlands, fish and wildlife values, the land use, navigation, recreation, water quality, energy needs, overall general needs and welfare of the people. As I mentioned, Eagle punted two of the big decisions to them. So they will have to do a review of potential impacts on federally listed endangered, threatened endangered species. We do know that the project is going to adversely affect the northern long-eared bat, Houghton's goldenrod, and dwarf lake iris. Houghton's goldenrod and dwarf lake iris are along the shore on in Mackinac County. They also have to review the application under Section 106, which is the National Historic Preservation Act. And so the Corps should be consulting with the federally recognized tribes to help identify historic properties that may be present in the review area. The Watershed Council has significant concerns about the proposed permit application and provided detailed comments to the state and federal agencies. Some of our concerns include the impact to Great Lakes coastal wetlands. The Great Lakes coastal wetlands are considered to be some of the most ecological valuable areas in the Great Lakes, providing critical habitat for fish and wildlife, erosion control, water quality protection, recreational opportunities, and the proposed tunnel site is within one of the most pristine Great Lakes coastal wetlands in Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. Obviously, we mentioned the threatened endangered species. In the application, the plan for mitigating the loss for threatened endangered species, Enbridge proposed to relocate only 50% of the Houghton's goldenrod and dwarf lake iris that they damaged. Migratory birds, obviously the Straits of Mackinac are extremely important for water bird migration, with tens to hundreds of thousands of individuals passing through the area each spring and fall, including more than 25 species of waterfowl, common loons, grabs, cormorants. And then in the summer, breeding birds include federally endangered species like the piping plover and other species with special value like the bald eagle. We have tribal fishery rights. So the project occurs within the area of 1836 treaty territory for Michigan tribes, and 5 of the 12 federally recognized Indian tribes in Michigan are party to that 1836 Treaty of Washington. And so this reserves off-reservation hunting and fishing rights through that treaty territory. And the Straits of Mackinac is located right in the center of that ceded territory. Environmental impact statement. So a full environmental impact statement we believe is needed to assess all the potential impacts of the project. The Watershed Council and many partners throughout the state of Michigan have requested this of the Army Corps of Engineers, but we do not know if it will occur. And then there's cultural resources. So there was a letter in the files, buried in the files, that was quite disturbing, from the curator of Great Lakes archaeology, which stated that no new survey was conducted for the cultural resources assessment. Instead, the assessment was based on sonar imagery collected previously for other purposes. In addition, the technician assigned to the job was told only to consider shipwrecks and nothing else. And when the technician noted linear stone alignments, he was told to ignore them. And so the cultural deposits, the linear stone alignments, which are very likely present based upon the secondhand sonar imagery, could be extremely significant, because we only have a number of those sites from this time period, and it would be the first instance in which that would be documented in Lake Michigan. The curator for the Great Lakes archaeology commented that sites like these are extremely vulnerable to disturbance and would be obliterated without a trace by the proposed tunneling. In addition, there were members of Michigan tribes that went out with an ROV and found what they believed to be cultural resources in the straits as well. They found stones that again appear to be arranged in circular and the linear patterns on the lake floor. So they believe this warrants further evaluation and investigation. And last I heard, they were working to find a university or archaeologist to conduct further analysis. So then there's also the Michigan Public Service Commission, which Enbridge filed an application with in April of 2020. So the Michigan Public Service Commission reviews these applications under what is called Act 16. So Enbridge will be required to demonstrate that there is a need for the proposed pipeline, that the pipeline was reasonably designed and routed. In addition, they have to look at what is called MIPA, or the Michigan Environmental Protection Act. So they have to look at the environmental impacts of the project and feasible and prudent alternatives. So this Act 16 process is very different from normal permit application processes. It's reviewed as part of a formal hearing process known as a contested case, which includes expert witness testimony, cross-examination, legal counsel representing the various parties. And so Tip of the Bit Watershed Council, in partnership with Michigan Environmental Council, National Wildlife Federation, and the Grand Traverse Bay Bands of Ottawa and Chippewa, have intervened to become a party in the case. This first time, actually, the Watershed Council has formally intervened in an MPSC case, and we're intervening to help ensure the case marked by robust analysis, careful planning, transparent information exchanges. We really want to make sure that the MPSC delivers a decision that's based on sound policy and law, and one that represents the citizens and natural resources of Michigan. So this process generally takes a year. This one will likely take longer. And again, it's technical analysis, thousands of pages of documents and testimony and legal papers. It's an extremely expensive endeavor. So any donation, no matter its size, can help the cohort of intervening groups put forth the best legal case. So you're always welcome to donate to either the Watershed Council or Michigan Environmental Council. It will help us provide the proof the Michigan Public Service Commission needs to stand up for Michigan citizens and the environment. Excuse me. So what is the future of the Line 5 tunnel project? Well, here's what we do know. We do know there are still many permits for Enbridge to obtain. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Michigan Public Service Commission, they need a soil erosion sedimentation permit, and local permits. We do know they will not get final decisions anytime soon. We're looking fall or late this year at the earliest. Once we get those decisions, depending on what they are, there could be appeals, contested cases, or lawsuits. We've already seen this happen with all three, with actions related to Line 5. Obviously, all of these would delay the onset of construction for the tunnel. So I can't say what will actually happen, if there will be a tunnel or not in the future. What I can say is that construction will not begin in 2021 as Enbridge had hoped. Excuse me. And a new pipeline in the tunnel under the Straits of Mackinac will not be operational by 2024, as Enbridge had claimed. So there, for more information, here's some resources. We have pipeline information covering a whole broad spectrum of areas, including the applications. The state of Michigan has dedicated pages for the various applications. So it's just michigan.gov line 5. From there, you can look at the ones for Eagle, ones for Michigan Public Service Commission. There's also a page for the Michigan Straits Corridor Authority. The Army Corps of Engineers has a dedicated page for their Line 5 permit application. And then Enbridge has a page for Line 5, and it actually has a ton of information, and I encourage you to take a look at it. And so with that, I will say thank you, and I will stop sharing my screen and take questions now. So again, for questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A, and I will come through and answer them. So the first question is, why is the pipeline shut down in 8-foot waves? And does this wave energy impact conditions on the bottom? So the agreement between Enbridge and the state chose the 8-foot waves very simply because it was an arbitrary number that they could both agree with. We know for a fact that the equipment for containment and cleanup does not work effectively at about 3.5 feet of waves. So it was just an arbitrary number that was chosen. Now, the currents in the Straits of Mackinac are fascinating. They change every couple of days, flowing from Lake Michigan to Lake Huron. And they can also flow in different directions from, so they can be flowing to Lake Huron in the top of the water column and to Lake Michigan in the bottom of the water column. So that's also part of the reason why the Straits of Mackinac is often deemed to be one of the worst places for a pipeline and oil spill, just because the currents and the way they switch and change can be so difficult to predict. So question regarding the UP propane supply. Is material transported in both directions through the pipeline? And the answer is no. So the material travels from the north to the south. However, there is a propane facility up in Rapid River in the UP where propane is taken off and can be then distributed to the UP. Hopefully that answers questions. What is the status of the Army Corps of Engineers to do an environmental impact study? And I think I answered that. As of right now, we do not know if Enbridge will, or I'm sorry, if the Army Corps of Engineers will be doing a full environmental impact study, if they will do an environmental assessment. Again, the Watershed Council and many other organizations throughout Michigan have requested a full environmental impact statement. are the government actions and associated lawsuits seeking total shutdown of Line 5 or just this segment in the Straits? So the revocation and termination order and the lawsuit to confirm its validity is just seeking shutdown of the dual pipelines in the Straits of Mackinac. However, at the same point in time, if you shut down that portion of pipeline, it does hinder Line 5 from operating completely, at least initially, until another relocation is done. So I think that's part of the point is, you know, Line 5 could continue with another pipe, say, in the tunnel. But they're just looking to shut down specifically the dual pipelines currently in the Straits of Mackinac. What else have these tunnel boring machines been, where else have these tunnel boring machines been used? So they have been used, yes, in the US and in other countries, and they have been successful. It all depends on, the big thing with respect to these tunnel boring machines is making sure you know the geology that you're digging through and boring through, as well as designing the tunnel boring machine specifically for that geology. And so that is what that geotechnical analysis that Enbridge did that was deemed not quite as, well, was deemed insufficient by Jacobs and McMillan in the report. But Enbridge is currently having a tunnel boring machine actually built in Germany specifically for this endeavor. What issues exist with Port Huron Sarnia tunnels and pipelines? That's a good question. So the replacement in the St. Clair River was not put in a tunnel. That was just, that replacement was just horizontal directionally drilled. So there was no tunnel placed in the St. Clair. So I am not sure regarding tunnels. I can look into that though. What about improving safety through the UP? That's a great question. And so another one of the things that the agreements between Enbridge and the state of Michigan did was include a assessment of the inland portion, the waterway crossings. So the state of Michigan and Enbridge actually looked at and grouped waterway crossings and tried to prioritize those that needed work. And some of those were in the UP. And so Enbridge was supposed to take measures according to the waterway crossing report that was submitted to the state of Michigan to improve safety measures along the inland portions. And I will be honest, I have not checked in on the status of that, but I should do that. So thank you. While the process continues to fold, is there no possibility of shutting down the pipeline until a solution is revolved and implemented? Well, so I think that is what the governor and DNR have decided to do based upon their review of the easement, is they want the current pipeline shut down May 12th. Now that does not affect anything with respect to the tunnel project. because that is a completely separate easement. That's a completely separate permitting process. So that is how Governor Whitmer is handling the process. Is she wants the current pipeline shut down while continuing to allow Enbridge to pursue the tunnel. Regarding the tunnel, have there been any similar studies that indicate the environmental impact of boring a tunnel that long under a flowing water body? So there have been comparisons made on tunneling projects both in the US and in Europe. And, you know, I think obviously the Great Lakes are a very unique ecosystem. So nothing is, you know, apples to apples. We can compare apples to oranges. But we have looked at the success and impacts of, I say we, the state has looked at the success and impacts of similar, although very different, tunneling projects done elsewhere in the world. Yes. As the tunnel is marketed as the alternative to the bottomlands, line 5, I'm concerned that other alternatives are not being considered. In particular, the option to reroute through existing pipelines, which will circumnavigate the Great Lakes until the Detroit River crossing. And so, yes, and so the state of Michigan actually looked at a number of alternatives during a state commissioned report on alternatives to line 5. And it looked at, you know, status quo, it looked at decommissioning the pipeline, it looked at rerouting the pipeline, both, you know, through the straits, through various means, going around the lakes. It looked at alternative transportation methods as far as rail and trucking, and it looked at utilizing existing infrastructure. It was deemed that utilizing existing infrastructure was not a viable option, I believe. But that's not to say that there are not other alternatives that have been deemed by other independent entities as viable, that would not increase the prices of propane or crude oil, that should not be considered instead. What involvement does Canada have in permitting? Any coordination with the International Joint Commission? Fantastic question. Canada has no involvement in the permitting process, and there is no coordination with the International Joint Commission. Although Canada has become very involved lately in making their opinion known on what they think should and should not happen. Obviously, the decisions made here in Michigan affect what happens with the commodities in Canada. So they have, especially after the governor issued the revocation and termination order, Canada has become quite vocal, not only to Governor Whitmer, but also trying to get Trudeau to talk to Biden, because, you know, thinking Biden has gotten involved in at least some of the pipelines across America. So Canada is definitely raising their voice, but has not necessarily, they don't have a formal role. Is it for sure that the May deadline will hold firm? No, it is not. Very simply because of the fact that Enbridge has filed suit in a federal court of law. And so at this point, it will be up to a judge on whether the May 12th deadline has to be met or not. I'm sure the state of Michigan will ask for an injunction, which means that they will want the pipeline shut down based upon the termination and revocation order while the court case is going on. And likewise, Enbridge is going to ask that the pipeline remain operational until a final decision is made. So that decision will ultimately be made by a judge. Let's see. What is the separation width between the east and west lines under the straits? I will have to get back to you on that one because I don't want to say something that is inaccurate. So I will get back to you on that one. And as of right now, that looks like all the questions we have. So we are over on time, so that is okay. So at this point in time, I thank everyone for joining me today to talk about the future of Line 5 and the tunnel. I appreciate you sticking with me, even though we went a little long. If you have any follow-up questions, you are always free to reach out to me. Thank you again. Stay safe, stay warm, and I will talk to you next time.